All right, so welcome to Nostr News.
Nostr News, the first one since Nostr Rap.
Back at it. So we're here in San Francisco.
That's right.
As we normally are.
Yep.
And we were off a week because we were, traveling off to Costa Rica.
And not really off. I mean, we put out multiple videos, right? So I would say, if anything, we were super on.
We weren't slouching. Exactly. But we did get to actually meet people in person, which was so fun.
It was so much fun. And we got to be roomies for a week.
Yes, we did. That was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thanks for, you found like the perfect place. It had a pool. We got to go swimming a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Had people over and podcasted from the place. So.
Super close to that, a wake center. It was great.
Yeah.
The whole thing, like, honestly, there's a lot. I'm sure we got to catch up on that. But high level, this was the single best event I've ever been to, like conference,
easy
by far.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it really fits the vibe of the kind of things I like to do, which is I don't love the big conference hall with, the booths and the blah, blah, blah. I love it when it's like the first one and it's just the people coming together. That's what really gets me going.
Yeah, just the people. And like, obviously you're set in the middle of a jungle. There's like very little formal programming, just enough that, you can like learn some stuff, but mostly just, people hanging out, at the beach or in the jungle and like very casual environment.
Like the sunsets were just amazing. Right?
When you were on the beach, like one of the most, so just a moment to like praise Costa Rica as well. Like, oh my God, like,
what a spot.
On the beach, you would turn around and I've never seen so much greenery, just jungle on the beach.
Yep.
Like where it met the beach, wild.
And the beach must have been, it's hundreds of meters depth between the jungle and the water.
Yeah.
And we were just like hanging out there and meeting people and, having beers. And
it was an incredible event.
Yeah.
All around.
Loved
and
it.
Also extremely productive. Like I feel like we produced multiple videos. I met a ton of really interesting people, hopefully many of whom we end up getting to work with. Like
totally.
It was just a great,
Yeah.
Can't say enough. Nostr Rap. Keep Nostr Rap weird. Let's do it again next year.
Let's do it again in October, right?
Yeah, hell
Is that what's happening?
Well,
I saw this, like some rumblings that's going to happen.
So, I mean, yeah, I've only seen a couple of rumblings as well, but a couple of things that I've noticed that are really interesting. One is it appears there's a lot of Asian users, right? Which is great. We didn't get to meet as many, obviously, at this conference. It's pretty difficult to arrive. But I noticed, like, when we got back from the conference, Jack was saying, like, hey, zap anyone who is Japanese or like a Japanese user. And then there was a huge thread of Japanese people.
Right.
Then, interestingly enough, actually, I don't know if you know this, my girlfriend, she used to work at Twitter back in the day.
Oh, I didn't know.
And yeah, we were talking about how like Japan was always like, the most used, or one of the most, if not the most sort of used country there. So that actually makes a lot of sense. And so then I started seeing a lot of people in the threads talking about the next conference should be in Asia.
Yeah.
And then Jack kind of gave the tip saying, hey, either Hong Kong or Tokyo in November.
Right.
I would be down with either, but Tokyo just sounds dope as hell.
But it needs to have a good Nostr pun tie-in with the name, right?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like we can't. The only reason it worked was because Nostr Rap is just like a brilliant portmanteau kind of
exactly.
collab.
It could be like Noskio or something. I don't know. And I misspoke.
Japanostra.
Japanostra. I like that. Noskong. I don't know. But I think you're right. October, not November. So I mean, I just am saying right now, either of those places I'm in. I would love to make a trip to somewhere in Asia. I'd love to meet users of Nostr in Asia. Like I hope that happens.
I suggested Bhutanostra.
Bhutanostra. I've never been to Bhutan.
Me neither. I don't know.
Nostrindia? I don't know.
Which one is that?
I don't know. India?
I get it. Okay.
Anyways, somewhere in Asia would be just, total mindfuck. I'd love to do it.
Yeah. That sounds like fun. So, and what happens like when we do that? Is it going to be like twice as many people gathering, or what do you think it feels like at that point?
Well, that's a really interesting question because you have a couple of different variables, right? Like in this one, it was very new. This was only put together in the last couple of months. So it's difficult for people to get their plans together. B, this was very Western focused, right? So it was easy for US people, Latin American people. The Europeans came, but it's kind of a far trek. If we go in Asia, I think the really dedicated people from the States and Europe will still come, but probably fewer. But you also now have all the Asian users. And, potentially, Asia is a much bigger region, a lot more populous. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot more people.
Yep. That sounds like fun. I would hope we get that all together.
The real question is, okay, so let's say we're somewhere in the order of like somewhere between 100 and 400K active users, something like that, depending on how you measure it. How many do you think we're at in October for Nostr Asia?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess, it depends on how you measure it all and stuff, but I've got to imagine it's a 5 to 10x over where we are.
I think so,
kind of feels about right.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's got to be more than double. Well, I guess it depends. It depends on like what kind of, like we always say, these exogenous events that just bring in a lot of people. I think it depends on like how many or which of those happen. if there's some huge other, crisis in social media or crisis in the world that draws people's attention to the types of things that the censorship resistance properties of Nostr serve, well, maybe it accelerates it faster, or if we just kind of keep, bumping along as we are, maybe it's slower than that. But I do think like with all the new innovation, new clients, new just ideas, like non-Twitter clone ideas that are being developed, I think it's going to probably create more of those types of events that bring a lot of interest on in various ways.
I agree. I think it's at least a 10x. I think that you have all of the new things that are being built, and each one of those brings new users with it. But like you said, you can't plan for this sort of exogenous events. But like we know Elon, I forgot what he's doing. He's doing something new with Twitter. Someone was telling me about today in the next couple of weeks. I don't know what he's playing, but whenever that dude plans something, some people will surely get pissed off and come over to Nostr. So I think going from 1 to 400K to like 1 to 4 mil users seems reasonable.
Right. So your sort of prediction, I just want to make sure I got it out there. Your prediction is like 1 to 4 million by October? Is that kind of what you're...
Let's say at least 1 million users, real users by October.
Yeah. Nice. I think it's very within the realm of possibility. I hope you're right.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope it's 10 million. Right?
Yeah. Do you have anything that concerns you about maybe some of the... I think sometimes when there's big new waves of people come on and learn about it, some people figure out how to engage in a productive way, and then some people just, discover it and they start spamming or something. Do you worry that like maybe, I don't know, relays will melt down or not have the right infrastructure, but we don't have the business model for relays figured out yet? Is it sort of too early for that kind of scale?
Well, I think that kind of scale is going to force relay operators to figure out their models real quick. Right. Like, there's nothing like, like baptism by fire to like solve problems. Right. So, I mean, that's a great problem to have, and like smart people will figure it out. I think, the fact that, really think about it, it's just been since mid-December that things really started taking off.
Yeah.
And then it was just hobbyist relays. So now we're mid-March, right? So we're 3-ish months later.
Yeah.
And we've already got multiple paid relays, relays with filters of various kinds, and proxies. We've already got the first subscription relay.
Yep.
That's 3 months out. So if you give me another 6 months,
yeah,
totally. People are going to have like, and by the way, LM Bits, right, with their relay extension, they already allow you, I think, to charge sats per megabyte.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with a high degree of confidence, there will be some relays that are able to scale and charge for that.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
So yeah.
So fun. What else was in mind from the conference? Like what, I mean, I just feel like replaying some of the steps, like I'm thinking about, we got breakfast that first day at that place right over by Whaletail. And I think it was like my first like real world, like, serious transaction with Lightning.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. We got a video of it too.
Yeah, we got a video of it. That was fun. I'd never
that.
actually, I always mess around with these wallets, but I've never really like had something to do where I could do it, and it worked. It was
the
easy.
Proverbial you bought coffee too.
I know I did. It was almost like a joke, but that was a lot of fun.
What was that experience like for you? Like, I don't know, did any like light bulbs go off or angels sing?
Well, I think it's like a fun use case, but the stuff that has really piqued my interest is all of how like the machine to machine, person to machine relay operator thing, all the little like tiny little payments that are useful for proxying these relationships that don't have so much kind of continuity to them. And so that was fun because it's like real world, and I'm standing there in front of, she shows me the thing and I do it, which was like fun. And it felt like a replacement for what we already do. But the stuff that I'm excited about is the stuff that like I've been doing now with relays and zapping people, which like there's no real equivalent in the world. That feels like the frontier for me. So this felt like a cute little, almost like a toy that was a fun way to sort of play with it in a way that I hadn't done before. So it was exciting for me. But I think I'm like still a bit more on the like, let's call it like team pure digital, versus kind of the coffee use cases. But I love that people are pushing that forward, and that there's like, lots of people trying to make those experiences work too. Because I think ultimately we'd like it all to work.
Totally. And I'm 100% in agreement with you. I think the relay stuff, machine to machine payments, IoT, all of that's going to be much bigger for sure. All the new use cases, that's what's going to grow us, many orders of magnitude, and pure digital things, digital goods, et cetera. Having said that, I think 2 light bulbs went off for me. And I have had the, opportunity to buy coffee and food and hotels and drives in El Salvador before. So I'm, I've had a couple of those experiences. But I think what was cool for me is, one, remembering that like, technology takes a little time to sort of mature, right?
Yep.
So, back in, I don't know, the early 2010s, everyone would talk about, oh, you'll never be able to buy a Bitcoin with coffee.
Right.
It's like, well, just give it a second to scale, right?
Right.
So it's like almost any time, unless there's like some fundamental reason a thing won't work, it's like once you have this sound base layer, like just give it some time.
Yep.
We will figure out solutions to those problems. And I feel the same way about Nostr. Like, we don't have private group chats yet. It's like, dude, we're a few months, like, give it some time.
Right.
Just like with the coffee buying use case, in a couple of years, we'll have it. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's really interesting, even though the purely digital stuff is, going to be bigger, I do find it very interesting that, some of these communities, and I think Costa Rica is more interesting than El Salvador, because El Salvador, other than Bitcoin Beach, was very kind of top down imposed, which I'm glad it's there, but it's not the best way to do it. Sort of bottoms up, people getting curious, kind of like starting to play with it, then realizing, oh wait, this is like a better money. This is kind of interesting. Yeah. That's better. And so what I'm hopeful to see is in places like Costa Rica, where people are not forced to use it, but they experiment with Lightning, like, oh my God, this is awesome. And like, hey, over time, maybe, Bitcoin goes up because it's a better money. Similarly with Nostr, right? Like I started, talking with some of the various, coffee bar baristas and stuff like that. And they were all interested in like, oh, I want to get on Nostr.
Right.
And so to me, it's going to be, how crazy and cool would it be if, this century is like the century of Latin America, right? Like roles, I don't want to say reverse. I think the US hopefully does very well as well. Although things are kind of crazy here right now. But how cool would it be if places like Costa Rica become the biggest adopters of Bitcoin Lightning, of Nostr, or Nostr? And as a result of that, maybe these are some of the most prosperous countries for the late 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, what you're mentioning reminds me of another relevant point that's a takeaway for me, which is I've grew up here in the US and sort of I've traveled around plenty, but I haven't spent a lot of time where I'm the, definite minority from a kind of nationalistic place. Whereas I felt like in Costa Rica and even at Nostr Rica, I don't know, what was maybe 10% US people, and otherwise everybody's from somewhere else,
that's cool.
It's kind of cool. And like, I guess I'd never had the intersection of that experience with like a tech focused thing. Yeah. It feels like the tech focused thing, at least I don't go to a lot of conferences and stuff, so I haven't probably seen that, but all my travel has been non-tech focused travel, I'd say, rounding to, zero tech focused travel. So that was like a fun thing to be like with all this tech thinking, but with a very non-American perspective.
Totally. And it's a good reminder that Bitcoin is the currency of the internet. Lightning is the payment network of the internet. Nostr is going to be, I think, the new web. And so because it's internet native, obviously the US will play a big role in it, but like, no country is going to have a majority, which I love.
Yeah, it's great. Kind of keeps everything more level the playing field, keep everybody kind of on the same footing.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
A good thing. And then I felt like there were these people that we met and got to just, sit around on a bench, and you're bumping into these people, people that I'd like made videos with before and finally got to meet in person, and people that I had interacted with on Nostr but had never actually met, and, we didn't really know each other. And then we came away from that actually knowing each other, which was like a fun kind of change for me.
What were some of those conversations that left a particularly big impression on you, whether they were jams or just talking to people?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick just one. It was fun. Like one thing is I was hanging around with Anton, who, Anton and Kamari, Ricardo work on Nostr, and so we'd made a video together, maybe a few months ago. And we just sort of like, he happened to sit down across the way and we're just like hanging out and chatting. And I think he connected me to like I think he was with his cousin, and we were all hanging together and we were talking just, about not all just like Nostr and Nostr stuff, but also, his experience in Bitcoin and his educational process with other people around that stuff. So it was just fun to see somebody in person that I'd, already been having like this online kind of relationship with, but finally got to meet him there. And then people like G Sovereignty, right? So I listened to his podcast before, but didn't know him. Like, I don't even think we'd much interacted on Nostr before. And then we actually got to hang out with him and Pablo at our place and making the podcast video. Oh, that was just so much fun, know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, those guys for sure. I mean, Pablo obviously is one guy that really stands out for me. Just like, I think we're both just wildly impressed with his rate of shipping all of his experiments. G Sovereignty certainly has some of the wilder, more out there ideas, but they're really good.
Yeah.
I also, I was telling you, maybe we'll talk more about some of his ideas today. I was very impressed with Rabble, who was early at Twitter and has seen a lot of different protocols. And I love just seeing my favorite thing about him was that he came with a radically different perspective than all the Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
I love that Nostr is Bitcoin Lightning focused, but like to his point, if this thing is going to reach 8 billion people, like not everyone's going to buy into Bitcoin ideology.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. Like if all they care about are we want micropayments in our app at work, don't care how it happens. Great. If it's Visa, great. If it's whatever, great.
Yep.
And so I love that, his ethos was much more of a solar punk ethos.
Yeah,
right? He's got like the purple hair and coming from Scuttlebutt, which is, definitely much more solar punk vibe. And I think that's awesome. Like I love to see the next wave of adopters. And if we want to get to the million users, by October or, 100 million users by next year, then we need to be opening the doors to a lot more communities. And so I think that's the thing I'm most excited about, seeing what happens when, we have Bitcoin Lightning integrated with a lot of these apps, but it's not a big deal. It's just there. And then we go into the next waves of users.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good. I mean, there's obvious reasons that people who are into Bitcoin are also into Nostr, like has a very like kind of foundational technological similarity in a way. But I would agree with your point. I like that, Rabble doesn't really care that much about Bitcoin. Maybe he's like somewhere between agnostic, or I think he worked on an ETH-focused company. And
I think he's come to the conclusion, started calling their stuff shitcoins. I think he realizes, Bitcoin's probably a goodish money, but I don't think he really cares.
Yeah,
He's
which I think
like,
is
we want
great.
micropayments.
Yeah, it's great. Then focus on like new products, new experiences, like what can be built on this, independent of some of the like, more hardcore ideologies, which, frankly, I mostly subscribe to, but I like to see, people who don't necessarily buy into that, but who still find it valuable to develop in this way.
Totally. He did make one point, which, I'm curious your perspective on this. His argument was that he thinks we could have gotten where we are so far with Nostr, just even if it were all open without the payments.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on that. I mean, I think maybe we could have gotten a lot of the first wave. I do think that Zaps are the first novel experience in Nostr. Other than the fact that it's censorship resistant or whatever, and people can just actually, that's not true. You can port your keys between different clients. That is a novel experience. So I think that and Zaps are the two novel experiences, but I wouldn't underestimate how interesting and exciting it is to be able to send a micropayment online.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I love the micropayments and getting Zaps, and I like to give them a lot. And I always tell, if anybody ever watches the YouTube videos and then they send me Zaps, I'm just like, pay it forward. Don't send it back to me. Send it on to somebody else. Show them how it works.
Yeah.
So I really love the fact that people, and there's problems. It's custodial and blah, blah, but the core experience, you can squint and see the future. Totally. That's what I get really excited about with Zaps. But I have a lot of, let's say, kind of, traditional tech normie type people, not super, even people who are subscribe to the interestingness of cryptocurrencies, but maybe are a little less determined about how they think about what matters there.
Yeah.
And let's call it normie tech or something, right? not crypto related stuff. But a lot of them are like, oh, okay, I tried Nostr and I don't really know what I'm doing here or why I'm here. So I feel like there's something about it that I've been looking for something like this for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, great. Whereas I think people who are I think there's a lot of people who are agnostic to the idea of censorship resistance as important.
Right.
And which actually, and we've been digesting this. I forget if this was a group chat. Was this a group chat that you were in?
Probably.
I forget exactly where this happened, but I think censorship resistance is an important feature. Let's say it's an important feature of Bitcoin, but it may not be the reason that a lot of people come to Bitcoin. Maybe the people come to Bitcoin because they value the supply cap. But you can't really have that supply cap without censorship resistance. So it's you don't value the censorship resistance per se. You sort of value what censorship resistance enables.
Totally.
And personally, I think it's I haven't experienced being financially censored in the existing system. I have experienced inflation.
Yeah.
Right. And the detrimental effects of that. And so I think it's easy for me to see that. And then I look at Nostr and I'm like, well, I've actually never been censored from a social network. So I'm not saying, oh, I need this because I've been censored because Elon Musk is kicking me off Twitter. That's not what I'm excited about. And so I think a lot of people hear, oh, it's censorship resistant, it's decentralized. What does it matter? It doesn't affect me. The thing that I'm excited about is not the fact that it's censorship resistant, but once it's censorship resistant, then all of the innovation that enables. Show up, build a little thing, little hack project. It gets some more momentum. Other people want to do it. It's what it enables. It's not like the thing itself. And then the thing itself is actually also useful and valuable. So when people are trying to escape some, repression on a social network, there's places to go now, right? So it's like also good for that. But I feel like too much of the narrative leads with that, whereas it's sort of just like an enabling foundation.
Totally. On the censorship resistance, I think that just means you need to do a few more G-sovereignty podcasts.
Then I'll know what
shout
real
out to our man. Lots of love. He'll understand why. But I do feel like, though.
He made me edit all that,
Thank God. It was provocative, let's say. But I do feel like for some of those normie people, like, yeah, I think the thing that they maybe haven't fully grasped yet, forget the censorship resistance. I'm with you 100% on that. To me, it's also like open APIs. You can build, or not even APIs, just open system. You can build whatever you want.
Yeah.
Better user experiences. We talked about this. Amazing. I think what's going to blow a lot of their minds. It's already mind blowing to me that you can create an account in Damus, take your app private key out, put it in your Alby, log into their client. Amazing. But I think what's going to blow their mind even more is once we get past the Twitter use case. So let's say, the peer-to-peer Bitcoin ends up blowing up yet next, or whatever the next app is. Like we were, when we're preparing for Nostr News, you had some links to a Nostr reader app, a reader only app, or when someone creates the first, local business network that also plugs into Nostr and it's like a Slack client. And when you can just say, export your key from Damus, your identity, and just load it into your workplace, your Slack. And by the way, you're the same in all of them. And by the way, if you're, nerdy yourself, you want to build your own little custom dashboard where you can have all of that come into one place, or someone else builds it for you and use that. And you get your Slack messages in one place and your Twitter DMs in one place. And then eventually your encrypted group chat, and it's all the same identity. That's when I think they're going to have their magic moment.
It reminds me actually too of what you're describing here. It reminds me of something that I think Rabel mentioned in his talk, which was how I think Twitter had some sort of a plugin or API where they were able to listen, crawl or listen to, or you could publish music events to Twitter,
that's right, yeah.
But it wouldn't publish them into your main feed. It kind of pushed them into a JSON or something that could then be recovered. But it kind of points to this thing that like our models of feeds today are kind of very one-dimensional in a sense. It's like, here's everything that DK had to say. Like it's every utterance on the internet. And like if I go comment on a blog, our kind of mental model is that those all just also get dumped in as notes in the feed that everybody gets to or has to look at. And when you start to think about like, what if you had like my, a Spotify title, whatever, YouTube playlist that I was okay publishing moments out, but a lot of people might not care about my music taste, and they could kind of filter that and consume a different subset of my feed than just kind of everything or nothing.
Right.
And that's like everything or nothing idea is sort of a centralized idea. Whereas the more like fine-tune, show me the music events from this person, show me, news or outbound links from this person, show me all the conversations from this person, or other types of tags or structure that people might choose to add based on the client. Like, if I'm pushing something into a Slack that you're also in, Slack-like experience that you're also in, maybe those messages you can view in a client in a certain way, but they don't have to necessarily hit like the main feed that people would see in like Damus if they follow, right?
Totally. And I think, as I think about kind of mental models for this, I was talking to one guy at Nostr Rap, and he said it in a way that was kind of very like old school, like enterprise software-y, but it really stuck with me. He was like, all Nostr is like a brand new open data lake. And I would take that even one step further and say it's one giant, forget lake, ocean. It's a new ocean of data. And I think, again, we're kind of replacing, the more I think about it, both replacing SMTP and HTTP, like we're literally building the new publishing and reading layer for all of the internet, right? And so you've got this new ocean of data. And within that ocean of data, when you publish it, you can either put it just into the ocean for anyone to do whatever the hell they want with, or you can have permissioned pieces of the data in like little separate tributaries or lakes or whatever that come off of the ocean. And then once you have this giant, water ecosystem with different permissions, then anyone can come and build anything they want of it. And it got me thinking, I'm just kind of doing this live. Your first article you published on this, you talked about how, if we think about how and why we're rebuilding the internet, you had a great point. I forgot what you said, but like why we got here. in Web 1.0, you could read anything,
Right.
but the problem was it was hard to publish. What was your point around that?
So I was kind of comparing. A lot of people hear about the idea of Nostr and they relate it to like, oh, didn't we have RSS? Didn't that kind of work?
Right.
And the point, and RSS was a technology. I think it was first proposed in like 1999.
Yeah.
So like we've had a long time with this.
Yeah.
And if you think about a very 50,000 foot view, this is just RSS, but actually the details matter.
Right.
And this is nothing like RSS. RSS is a great reading technology, but it's not a good participation technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you publish something and I subscribe to you, I can read everything from you, but it's not two-way. I can't be like, actually, Max, that's an interesting point. Here's what I have to say about that.
Right.
Because to do that in an RSS world, I both have to like create a new blog, create a new RSS feed, convince you to look at my RSS feed somehow, which you're not normally going to be tuned in to do. So how do I even connect you and make sure that's obvious, right?
And I mean, I think that's a great point. And I remember we talked a little bit about why that didn't work with podcasting. Mm-hmm. It did work better because that was, you're not like necessarily responding.
There's no reply, right, in podcasts.
Exactly. But why is it that the internet wasn't built this way the first time around? Was it strictly like a technological or hardware limit? Like it was difficult to be able to write back as well, or
no? It's not a technical problem. It's entirely like a human behavioral tools problem.
So why don't you think something like Nostr emerged originally?
Well, so you think about like sort of the history of the internet, right? And like Tim Berners-Lee making the web. A lot of that is like even just having like a browser to consume from these servers and a server that can publish. That was kind of like the initial breakthrough of the web.
Right.
Like a bunch of servers to serve the content, a bunch of browsers to consume the content.
Right.
But browsers did not create servers. They wouldn't like write to servers. That was not part of the initial web architecture. And kind of blogging tried to
Well, that's what I was saying,
that.
because blogging was sort of that.
Yeah. But then they're at these specific points. Like my blog lives at such and such live journal or Zanga or whatever,
And do you think that's just because in those days, the use case was merely to be able to like, okay, like we're used to consuming from the television or radio, like one to many, and it just wasn't socially.
It was like a major deal that people could have a voice.
Yeah.
That was just not a thing before the internet, really.
Yeah.
It was like if you're on the radio or you're on TV, you have a voice, or you write for the New York Times. But the idea that like some random person could just say what they wanted and it could be seen by a million people, that was just not a thing.
So you think that, I mean, and I'm sure the technology has evolved, right, to make it a lot easier so you can upload things faster. Because even back in those days, right, like download speeds and upload speeds, I'm sure upload speeds were not that fast, like in 98
That's with mostly
something.
text, right?
Yeah, well, fair enough. But even then, even with mostly text, I mean, I remember that.
Nice, good impression.
Yeah, exactly. I guess you're right. A lot of that was like social norms. Like once people had the experiences with things like Twitter, it's like now we expect it,
right?
And now we're going back and
So in that era, it was like the website
right.
was like the hub of connection,
right.
and there wasn't the idea of reading and writing from a website.
Just
in the 90s. It was mostly just reading,
right?
And RSS kind of developed to make it easy to syndicate all of the reading, but then there wasn't a way to like now create a new website on my behalf real time while I decide to reply to you.
Totally. Well, and the reason I'm asking all this is, or kind of jamming on this now is because if you think about it, the internet itself, like HTTP, that itself is again like a data big lake, and the browser is just like a way to like get around the lake, and then Google is the way to find the information to put in the browser around the lake. And so it's interesting now as we think about, we're going to have lots of micro apps. But as Christopher David pointed out, and that was also a very fun conversation in Arcade City,
right.
Most people are not going to want to have a million different micro apps, and maybe some do, but a lot of people are still going to want kind of like their daily driver feed of some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting for me to think about, is there going to be a new dominant browser type experience? Are they going to be just radically different? Some people are going to have, the super apps like he's talking about working on. Some people are going to have old school type browsers. Some people are, whatever it is, whatever that new dominant form factor is, if there is a dominant form factor, and maybe it's just a whole bunch. But now, unlike that first time when you had Mosaic and stuff and it was just about consumption, the new dominant form factor needs to have chat. The idea of like two-way bidirectional or two-way maybe multi-directional chat built in from the core.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get there because we've been through this era. Like centralized systems actually figure things out faster in certain things, right? Like it's hard to build a fully open like the coordination problems are really hard to build RSS as read, write, participate like in 1999.
Right.
Whereas if you like wait a little bit and like blogging happens and then, you know, social media tools happen where everybody's a reader and a writer, then you kind of know what it should look like. And now we actually have tools that are like, hey, what if we rethink the architecture to make this stuff work kind of how we've now, you know, the centralized players have figured out one major important slice through like that the world cares about. Now, I think, the centralized are good for figuring that out and figuring out what should the UI look like and how should notifications work and when should push notifs go and blah, 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 all of those things, right? How should follow buttons? That is now figured out. But the thing that they miss is all of the innovation of the thing, you know, the small app, micro app that only serves 100,000 people or something. Like
totally.
They never built that one. So I think we're sort of like, we're past the point now where we've learned how to do this. Now we can take those things and decentralize them and allow for a lot more innovation, make it all more open source. But there's probably always some frontier of the stuff that we don't yet know how to decentralize.
Always.
And, to me, I've mentioned before, I think that feels like a lot of AI stuff feels like it's not about to be decentralized all of a sudden. I saw a couple.
Although we'll talk about some stuff about that today. Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, I saw a couple of projects that look like they tend towards that, but I think, as I've said before, I think, once you can do GPT-3 on your phone, then you really want GPT-7.
Totally.
Because like there's a cloud service that can just do like so much more. So I think that's kind of going to be the next frontier of centralization while we decentralize the things that we looked at 5, 10, 15 years ago. And, maybe 5 years forward from now, we'll be like, oh, now we actually have really good architectures and know what we want to do with these models and how we want to train them and how weights and, everything should work in a model. And then we're like, okay, now we actually have like both some credible experiments that maybe are starting today, and we kind of know how the centralized providers went, and then we can actually say, okay, now we don't have the coordination problem, right? We don't have to all debate that like a notifications tab or a follow button actually works because like Twitter, the centralized org, figured that out. Like that experiment has been run, and we have sort of a productive answer.
Right.
So I think it's really a case of like centralize things to get a good rough first pass at it, and then decentralize things to like blow it out and just create all the different
diversity,
flora and fauna.
Exactly.
That can grow out of that. Yeah.
I'm with you 100%. I think, I couldn't help but think when you said, it was the age first of the reader, then the reader and the writer. I think in this next age, I mean, I guess one open question is, I think obviously creators are going to do very well in this new world. We talked a lot about how maybe they're the big winners even over tech companies, which is awesome because they're the ones doing the creation. I think this is also going to be the age of the curator, which is going to be very exciting. And I think now we'll be able to, in a much more decentralized way, have people able to curate and have sats be a part of that as part of the algorithm ranking. Although I do wonder, to your point about AI, and we talked about this ad nauseum with Pavlo and G Sovereignty as well, but how much curation like is going to be, let's say over the next decade, really good human curators versus really good AIs versus really good humans and AIs. Yeah.
And I think curation is always kind of a funny, it's had a funny place in the world because I think creation of new content, writing a blog post, I think people generally were skeptical that they would ever pay for it, 20, 25 years ago. And now it's fairly normalized that some people will pay for blog posts to be written.
Yeah.
That's a fairly normalized thing. But the idea of like curation, we don't have any great examples of like where people are willing to pay purely for the act of curation.
Well, I mean, one kind of example of that, right, is like a little bit the venture capital world or like some of the stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like YC or whatever, anyone that raises a fund and you're essentially, I mean, there's more to the job than that. You have to find it, you have to win the deals. There's other elements, but it's essentially a curation job. Agents, right? Whoever they raise money from. But you haven't seen it kind of necessarily done at like a democratized mass scale.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking like in media and online media is, I guess, more the lens I'm using when I say I don't think we've seen really how. So yeah, venture capital is a clear case of curation, but doesn't really work online. Like there's no online curation mechanisms. I mean, people have tried, but they've never really worked because it's such a human business, right?
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, I would also argue maybe some of these knowledge marketplaces are first attempts at that, but they're closed, right? And this was kind of the thesis with Stacker News, right? Like Hacker News and Reddit are kind of curation places with their upvotes, but again, they're closed, so they can only get so big.
Right.
But I do think that the thesis for me with Stacker News has always been you open that up, and then you also put SaaS as part of that. Okay, now like maybe there's a real market opportunity for the best curators.
Yeah, so maybe Stacker News is the best example we have so far, and like I'd say it's promising, still early, but a promising example of people actually getting paid for curation. But like the last 25, 30 years of the web, I can't think of any that I'd really point to where curation was, where like a consumer of a curated experience saw it as valuable enough to pay for.
100%. And I think that in this next wave of Nostr, you have, going from read to write to read and write, and then you also have the micropayments. Those two things together, I think, are necessary for this new wave.
Yeah. Though I also think there's stuff, and we sort of, maybe we'll touch on it already, or maybe we're just jumping through the news anyway.
Yeah, whatever. We're just totally freestyling this week.
The whole freestyle, we'll end up covering the news on accident through our freestyle. But I think some of the stuff, obviously the stuff that G was working on with Nostrocket is one way that, in a flavor of curation, let's say. Mm-hmm. And then I think, he's obviously very deep in the music stuff, and he did a music panel. Yeah. And, obviously now Pablo is working on this music thing too, and there's a lot of energy around that. I think that, ultimately like a music publishing label is kind of like...
Totally.
A curation layer, right?
100%.
That comes bundled with like distribution and some financing. And so I wonder if now that we have like these payments that you can do, cheap, frictionless, kind of free to transmit, I wonder if we can create like new places where a curator of music can actually get financial compensation and benefit from the fact that they have good taste and they help something come into the world.
I love it. Well, yes, 1,000% yes. First of all, I'm so excited to see all the experimentation happening around Nostr and music.
Oh yeah.
As both, an artist and a super music fan, it keeps inspiring me as much as I love what I'm doing now, but I want more time to work on the music. It is so awesome to see so much energy there because, you've obviously got Pablo and his experiments, G and everyone else that came to their panel, which sadly didn't go to, but you've got, Jack has talked about with Tidal, obviously something big is going to happen there. The Wavelake guys, where I'm an investor, they're really deep in Nostr. One thing that I was mentioning to you is I hope this all kind of goes into one standard that also ideally tags in with the value for value standard with podcasting. And again, the more we're on one standard, the bigger everything can get. But absolutely, I think music is unique and special in the world in that it's magic. When you listen to music and you get, it is a special vibration, right? Like it can put you in a whole different mindset. It can make you, like, for example, I use my, playlist on Spotify, although I'm not a huge fan of Spotify, but as like a diary, right? I can go back and listen to different music in different times. It takes me to a different place. So I think people have such a special and unique connection with music that I think this is an area, and the model is so broken for artists to make money.
Right.
This is an area where I hope both the artists can do very well and the curators. And if you think about it, we already do pay curators a lot. Like, yes, labels are a great example. Like, for example, someone like Warp Records, which I've been listening to for 25 years or however long they've been around, 20 years. Anytime they put something out, I'm like, okay, it's probably pretty good. They've got good taste, or like Stone's Throw or any of these labels that are really good. But DJs, right? People pay a shit ton of money to go see DJs. And like, they're doing a little bit of effects and mixing, but like, honestly, you could just be like, play. And people would still go play because they want to hear really good music.
Right. So it's the curate. You're saying the DJ is the curator.
100%. And people really, like a good DJ is worth the show. Because you're paying for their taste, right? And some showmanship, but like mostly their taste. So I think that'd be really cool if that can now, like, there can be 100,000 X more DJs.
Right. I'm actually intrigued. I have been following along. Did you make it into this Telegram, this music publishing Telegram?
It's huge. There's so much happening. Holy shit.
God.
I know. Exactly.
If you're at all excited about this music stuff, he's
Get
just like,
Telegram.
Chime in, kind of fly on the wall. I love the energy going there. And then like the ideas that are popping around are kind of like expanding my mind around what could be done here.
Say more. What's an idea that's expanding your mind?
So, I think we think about a lot of like these clients like, oh, it's Damus is a great Twitter clone on Nostr and like it really well executed, but it feels like it's, skeuomorphic in many ways, right? And when I first heard about the stuff that people were thinking about with music, I was like, oh, okay, so they're going to build, I don't know, should Tidal be a Nostr client? Should we build new clients that are Nostr clients that do Tidal-like or Spotify-like things? Like, that all seems very reasonable. Like, I don't know exactly where you get the content in a legit way, but that like seems like an appealing idea, but it feels, again, like, like understandable why. But then the stuff that really started expanding my mind was some of the stuff they're talking about in the Telegram there, where they're talking about like a given piece of media could be, I think, and I don't know if I got the details right, but you could like sign that piece of media with, as an artist, a creator, with like your private key, so it comes from you, and maybe even embed a lightning address, and then maybe give it properties like you can listen to this every time you pay this lightning address, or you kind of like bundle the media with its own paywall. I think, I don't know, maybe I made that up. Maybe I was like, dreaming this, but I thought I saw something like that I was like, oh wow, it's like, it doesn't matter which client you're using, and you don't have to have like these paid relationships with the clients, because we're, if you think about the way, Tidal, Spotify, et cetera work, those are more traditional models.
Yeah.
Then this has this like new underpinning that lets us think about the musical unit, like the actual binary object that contains the music, can now kind of transmit around these relays and have these, signatures of authenticity, and even have maybe lightning addresses embedded for payment. And I don't know, wow, it's like a new atomic unit for creativity.
Totally. Well, and there's so much cool new stuff you can do that, right? Like another thing that kind of I was thinking about a bit is, the Geyser guys, one of the new things they're adding with Nostr is badges. So just like on their platform, you can give away badges as this guy was an early supporter or girl was an early supporter or whatever of your project. And some of them, the ones that have been doing this already are like the artist. So they're visual artists, and they're very cool badges. Like, for example, I'm always wearing my dad's shirt. This one's famous Nostrs of Lightning Land, which is a take on famous monsters of Filmland. He's really into monster movies and stuff. But anyways, like for people that have good art, those badges mean something, and you want to kind of show off to the community, blah, blah. So I could totally imagine a world where we talked again, we always use the Radiohead example because they did this within Rainbows. They just put out the album for pay what you want. But imagine if they did something where they're like, okay, we're going to issue whatever, 10,000 badges or whatever, and we're going to just give the track to anyone that has this badge, and maybe you pay for it or a subscription or something, and eventually the track's going to be available to anyone, but you get it first. Or the album we drop for free, but if you get this, you get the B-sides or the demo tapes, or like all the stuff that, like, as a super music nerd, you're going to really want. And eventually it will all be free. But again, maybe you get it first, maybe you get it, the badge associated with it. There's some kind of like special relationship you have with the artist that unlocks, special properties. All the NFT crap that we've heard about, like, but done in a way that's authentic and real.
And also, I mean, the lightning prisms that we looked at. Like, because one of the features of a label is that they help with distribution, right? It's curation, taste, distribution, and some financing. And with the way like Prism payments and that, like, a lightning address kind of, that rides along with the media object, you could actually have like a Prism payment so that you get all future forward payments on this thing divided according to the splits. And like, if you're an early financial backer of a creator, you actually then get exposure to the future cash flow that asset generates. Like
100%. And I super hope that works, right? Because then, for someone that spends a lot of their time trying to discover new artists, imagine, like you're saying, like the Prism allows you, the first 1,000 people to share this, right? You get, 20% of all future revenue are split between those, first 1,000 people.
Or maybe you put down like 100 million sats to finance an artist. And that gives you some, future cash flow on whatever it's produced.
You're buying equity in the project.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And so I think that's going to be absolutely huge. And then you can imagine, going back to the DJ point, right? Like, then people are going to own different kinds of distribution channels, right? Your followers or whatever. And so like back in the day, it used to be like what made or break would break a record is like, well, could you get it with the disc jockey or with the radio station? Well, now if you're, someone that you're known as a tastemaker, you're doing live DJ sets every week, and you drop a new track on there and it goes viral and people start listening to it and you own 10% of the project. Okay. That starts being a really interesting business proposition for you too.
Right. So you start like aligning incentives around an ecosystem of like the people who create, the people who curate and build audiences around their taste. And like everybody gets to kind of like voluntarily set up whatever works for them, whatever they think is important. And then actually you can track how these things flow through and actually more kind of effectively distribute payments and compensation to the people who are kind of doing the various pieces of work, the creation, the distribution, the marketing, the taste making.
Who knows? I mean, beyond just music, maybe for podcasts, maybe we'll have to be doing this with Nostr News in a couple months.
I told him that actually. P2X chimed in. I said that on the Telegram. I was like, because it's, it's kind of a multimodal, like, Spotify today is both, hardcore a music service, but then
Yeah.
it migrates to become a little bit of a podcast service. And then they also have like video stuff you can upload. And meanwhile, YouTube is like purely a video service, but music is a huge part of YouTube. And then they also just launched this podcast tab. I don't know if you saw that, but like
No, I
YouTube
didn't.
is kind of becoming a podcast hosting platform, which I guess makes a ton of sense. So the like audio, video, music thing all kind of converges. And so I said, I was like, we're going to put, as soon as this thing is ready, we're going to put Nostr News up on, whatever Pablo and the crew figure out.
I love it. And
Is it Zapster.lol? Is that the
he's always good. Yeah, Zapster, right? Like that's the Napster reference.
the Napster of the zapping?
But I mean, and it's interesting to me because like, and I know, I've obviously got investments in different projects in the ecosystem, but like, Wavelake, they're starting with music. And what I really like about them is, Sam and Michael have really good taste. And so they'll have their own kind of like specific taste. Oscar, meanwhile, with Fountain, he's only podcast today, but 100% he wants to move into music, and which is great. Like, and again, if they're all on the same standard, that's better for everyone. But I don't know if you saw this. I think I saw this say Oscar shared it. I think it was the Tales from the Crypt. I think that one of these Bitcoin podcasts, they shared that Fountain just eclipsed Spotify as their number 2 podcast player.
Oh.
Now, obviously,
this is TFTC.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
okay?
it's Marty Bent's podcast, and
yeah.
so obviously it's a very Bitcoin heavy audience, but that's still a pretty big deal. Like say Apple's like roughly 50%, Spotify was second at like 9.8, Fountain just jumped it to 10. So like
Nice.
People are starting to move into this world. They're getting accustomed to the idea of you pay the creator directly. And I think that's going to like expand. All of these guys are going to add everything, and hopefully it'll all be Nostr enabled. So it's all on the same standard.
Yeah. Let's go.
Let's fucking go.
So what have you followed that Telegram or any other little tidbits that you've gotten from the Telegram, or what's going on there?
Well, for whatever reason, it was hard for me to get in the link. I had to like go through a couple of like the link on different
They're trying
sites
to keep you
get in.
out.
Yeah, I know.
I
They're
think
like,
Pablo's like, oh, that guy.
exactly. They're like, man, once Cypher Pedro gets here,
Then it's all over.
there goes the neighborhood. But I mean, there's so much to read. I'm not even fully caught up on it yet. I think the thing that just excites me the most is that there's multiple people working from multiple angles.
Yeah.
So you got the guy that originally kind of had the idea, Pablo, who came in, and by the way, like, does this dude sleep? Like, what is his deal? Like, he's shipping more than anyone I've ever seen. This dude just like shows up. Oh, great idea. And like, everyone's like, well, maybe we'll have a prototype in a week or 2. He's like, no, here's the prototype. I built it on my flight.
Right.
While also shipping like this other project. You're like, God damn.
I said he's like the Zorro of Nostr.
He's everywhere.
It just like leaves his little fingerprints. And,
Shout out to that guy. That dude's prolific. But anyways, so he's there prototyping, putting stuff out there.
Yeah.
Then I was super excited to see Sam from Wavelake get in the group. So I think that my biggest takeaway is just there's a lot of different people, and maybe they agree on some things, not on everything. But the more people can push for the same standard, the better.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm excited.
Cool. And I'm just gonna pop over because we're talking about Zapster. But did you look through the Figma that Carnage? You know
did.
Carnage, right?
Oh, actually, I haven't met Carnage yet. I would love to. But
Was he there? I don't think I met him.
no, but I've seen a lot of like he's also one of these guys, very prolific, open
Super
source
prolific.
designer.
Yeah.
He's everywhere,
And it seems like anything design, like he's kind of.
Well, and that's the thing. He was the one that first kind of came up with this specific idea, and then Pablo built it. I think is that right?
Yeah, that might be. Yeah. That might be. So here's I'm just in the Figma right now. So he's got like a really nice professional logo. I mean, this makes you feel kind of proud to work on open source software when it looks like when a designer who has real taste and talent comes in here and makes like designs. You're like, oh, I'd be proud to build that.
Totally.
Like, I want to make that thing look in the world like I just want it to exist because it's going to look good and people are going to appreciate it. Because a lot of times, I mean, you look 20 years ago, open source software is always like, it feels so cypherpunk. It feels so inaccessible.
It's like the fucking command line everywhere.
Right,
like,
right. Whereas now, look at this. You got this like beautiful, kind of purple, kind of, what do you call that? Like some sort of a cloud
some
effect
like
going.
Galaxy thing.
But you can see here kind of the basics of the thing. So he says, it had to come full circle, earn 100% of your music streams.
Love it.
So here's kind of like Carnage's profile, and it kind of looks like, traditional social networky following. And then he's got like his listen list. I'm going to actually zoom in right here if I can. And you can see, 2.1 million sats were zapped here and 1.2 million plays.
I like it.
So kind of having the zap, payment integrated and visible directly within on the piece of media. So not on like a note, the way we do in a note in a feed, but on like a playlist or on a particular piece of music. and then the chat kind of lives here. But again, this chat could publish back to your main feed, but it doesn't have to.
Right.
These could be like all of the notes that you had to say something about the music thing, about Zapster.lol or whatever we're calling it at the moment. Zapster? Isn't it Zapster? Yeah. But they don't have to. They could just be consumed here. Maybe you consume here from people you don't know or people who are interested in the same music as you, but who maybe you don't otherwise bump into a lot, on like traditional Nostr, let's say, on like main feed Nostr.
Totally.
Anytime.
And by the way, one thing that I love that I hope to see there is a lot more culture of remixing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think what's going to happen is, once you put out the stems or whatever that anyone can play with and it's all on Nostr and you build these communities around it, like one of my favorite groups is Boards of Canada, which is this kind of like enigmatic, late 90s. I think they actually got started late 80s, but like late 90s kind of trip hop, kind of like ambient kind of hip hop group. And they only drop albums. I don't think they've dropped one now since 2012 or 2013. And they're classics and they kind of go into hiding, super reclusive. So because of that, they've got this like cult following and people are like on Reddit forums, like trying to decrypt all their things. Well, imagine you have all of that in one place, their stems are shared there. You've got all the community talking about all their music saying like, wouldn't it be cool if, I don't know, like this message were said in a different language or something, then people are just going to start probably remixing it.
Right.
The remixers on top of that, hopefully can get paid, but also maybe send a kick of the sats back to the original artist as well.
Nice.
It's going to be so cool. I can't wait.
Well, this makes me think. I got back from Costa Rica,
Yeah.
and I was thinking about all this music stuff, and I was thinking about your rap, and I was like, we should put together like some verse that kind of references some of the stuff we learned at Costa Rica, almost like Costa Rica rap, right?
Oh, interesting.
Have you given that any thought?
I haven't yet, but now that you put it in my mind.
I went to Chat GPT with it and asked for it, and I was very underwhelmed by the result. It kind of threw the name Nostr in a bunch, but then just had random whatever. It doesn't know the people involved or kind of the topics.
So would that mean my job as a rapper is safe for now?
But for now it is. Yeah, you've got at least another
6
3
weeks.
or 4 weeks.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I'm thinking when I go back to I'm going to go up to the mountains at some time, where I have kind of my piano and more of a recording setup.
Oh,
So-
dude, yeah.
So maybe
lay something down, dude.
Maybe we'll lay down some tracks, and we can. If you've got something in mind by then, maybe we can collab on. I'll do some piano, I can do some other stuff, and you could.
I'm into it.
You could rap. I like to sing too, so.
All right, got the hook ready too.
Yeah, if I was thinking about almost like can we do a spoof, almost like a Weird Al spoof? I don't know what song it should be to, but
I don't know about Weird Al. Maybe we do something a little bit more direct. But I like the idea.
Yeah.
I like the idea.
I know you're just like hoeing out for zaps, right?
Exactly.
Nobody likes that nonsense.
Zap at me.
So what else? What else? Anything else from these screenshots? Just props again.
No, I mean, I think it's just a great idea. I mean, I guess I would just say again, like I think to your point, having really good designers in this space is as important, if not more important, than the actual software developers, especially for something like music, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want something, and by the way, I don't know if have you seen the Wavelake site?
I played with it a little bit a while back, yeah.
So it's not Nostr enabled yet, but they're certainly very aware of it. They're certainly looking at it, and they've made a lot of progress lately. They're getting a lot more bands onboarded, and what I love about those guys is they just have phenomenal taste. Their designs are great. The bands they have on there are dope, and so I just think that as important as the engineers and software developers are, the more we can do, and I love there's already a Nostr design group, but to get really good designers and good tastemakers, right? Like if we can get good artists, like I imagine if we could get, a band that has a huge indie following on here one day, like a Brian Jonestown Massacre, or Boards of Canada, like some cult following band, like.
But not Weird Al.
Look, if Weird Al came on wanted to be on Nostr, more power to the guy. But I do think early tastemakers matter. And if Nostr can kind of become the place, and this is something that Rabble talked about a lot as well, if when you see a neighborhood go cool, right, as you get, the hipster crowd in first or whatever they're called now, like people that are at the vanguard, right?
Yeah.
That matters. So I guess what I would just say is anyone listening to this, even if you're not an engineer, especially if you're a designer, but even if you're just a tastemaker, like getting quote unquote cool cutting edge artists and ideas on Nostr matters. Yeah. Because as people start thinking about, though, this is the place you come to read stuff you wouldn't read elsewhere, listen to music you wouldn't find elsewhere. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's how this thing will eventually become, mainstream.
Yeah, I agree. It's got to kind of bring stuff you can't find elsewhere, be the high signal.
Exactly. Be high signal, whatever it is.
Whatever it is, whether it's text or music or videos.
And and by the way, and that's something I mentioned in my little chat in Costa Rica when we were talking about investing is taste. Taste matters. And so if you have good taste in a particular area and can help get some of that content on Nostr, that is doing a huge service.
Yep. Cool.
Let's go.
All right. I'm going to pop over. I know we've been sort of out of order a little bit here, but I'm just going to pop over to the stats. I don't know if you have anything specific you want to highlight.
No, I'm curious, if anything, I mean, daily actives, weekly actives looks roughly similar.
Yep.
Nothing, I guess total users, what are we at right now for?
Daily news. There was this weird daily news spike, which was, I guess, was that 2 weeks ago? You don't know what that was due to, was it?
No.
It was no big.
PubKey with bio? Huh.
Yeah, PubKey with bio. I don't know if was there somebody who came on that would have been notable to drive a lot of adoption?
No. Was that during Nostr Rap? Maybe
no,
not.
I think it was 2 weeks ago, probably. So
yeah,
right
no
before,
idea.
Okay, maybe it was SBB failing.
Could be. Yeah, exactly.
Got to recover.
But by the way, I think it's not an accident that like all these new tools are being built just as the old system is collapsing.
Oh yeah.
Like thank God for Nostr and Bitcoin. Like honestly, like I try and stay very positive. Like things look kind of bleak in Normie land right now. Like so, thank God we got this stuff going on.
Right.
What are we at total users with bio now?
So this is profiles with bios. Total users were at about 1.1 million.
Cool. So that's a little over 10% growth from last time. And again, I know we've heard differing opinions on how many of those are real. But
right. I think profiles with contact lists are at 677,000. So I think that's another like pretty good filter, right? As if you're following some people. If you're not following anybody, that's kind of a bad sign. So I might call that with contact lists is probably like a pretty high quality, real user number.
If that's true, then my million number is about to get blown out of the water. It's going to be like a lot more than that.
But those are those are all accounts, not necessarily actively engaged because those are up before we saw those.
Right.
These are profile updates are up around. What are these? These numbers. These are partial days. It was a drop, but we're somewhere in the like 180 to 330,000 range
Per day.
Yeah, per
That's
day.
nice, yeah.
Total profile events published seem to be in the 5 million and change, almost 6 million profile updates.
Cool.
And 4.6 million contact lists. So it does feel, it's kind of up and down, a bunch of noise.
Let's take a look at the zaps.
The zaps. What's going on with the zaps?
Zaps definitely, I'm guessing Nostr Rap had a couple of high zap days.
A couple high zap. These are zaps, zap senders.
Zaps are definitely up.
Yeah. Zap senders, zap receivers seem to be generally.
Oh, actually, maybe they're constant. What was that blue one where it certainly
The
looked
blue
higher?
was zaps overall, I guess, which maybe, I don't know if there's senders, receivers, events, providers, and then I don't know if zaps is just like the general kind without those other filters on it, maybe. Total zaps closing in at the top end here on 361,000.
Nice.
Daily zap amounts.
Oh, it's a bit of an uptick.
These crazy, there's just like these, random events that happen that look, make it strong.
I like that, yeah.
Those are good.
The relays. Any change in the dominant relays here?
Let's see. So Damus is top and Snort is second. Actually, I was hanging out with Kieran over there and I was like, hey, so what are your, what's going on with like the relay world? He's like, well, we're running the second most popular one.
Very understated.
Yeah, very understated. Yeah. But I'm always curious, like what's happening. Like there must be like some driving ideas right now that there's like a thing called, I forget what it's like, the relay operators telegram, which I've sometimes pop into and out of, but I haven't kept up on like what's the scuttlebutt.
Yeah. Whoa.
Whoa, watch it.
I see what you did there, dude.
But what's the talk now going on in in the operators and software developer side of that?
Yeah. And also, I mean, I didn't get specific numbers, but I think it was Kieran or someone was telling me that for those guys, it's starting to get like non-trivial the amount of money it's costing to run servers. So I think we're kind of just at that point where very soon, like you're not going to be able to do this as a hobby. You're going to have to figure out, and doing a one-time payment's not going to cut it either.
Right. But even the monthly subscriptions, ultimately, like how long are you going to store the data for? There's
Totally.
There's problems to sort out. So did you look at any of the stuff, by the way, that was some of the decentralized stuff that we traded notes on had something to do with like connecting to torrents as sort of like file storage.
Oh yeah.
Are you deep on any of those ideas, or what's going on there?
Well, I mean, I was speaking with someone a while back. I mean, I think we mentioned this with, someone had sort of tipped me off the idea of you could take a torrent and associate that with a specific content creator. And so this idea was trying to tie together both what you were talking about, the curation for music and getting a fee for that with the distributions. Their idea was that, let's say Radiohead publishes in Rainbows, they sign it and say, this is my copy of the torrent.
Yep.
And then other people seed from them, and then they seed to other people. But you want to go to theirs because that's where the sats are going to flow because they're the shelling point.
Yep.
And I know we talked about this in Nostr Rap, whether or not you need the distribution with the curation. But that's the first place I started thinking about torrent distribution. Then I've started seeing, over the last week or so, a lot more people are talking about using torrent sharing, maybe not even as the first line to download a file, but always as an option in case there are cases of major censorship or whatever. I think that makes sense. But then the idea that really caught my eye, I saw on your Twitter feed first. I don't know if you want to pull this one up, but this idea was one of the few things I've ever read where it just blew my mind.
Which one are we talking here?
That
Give me the setup.
The little creature. No, what was it? The ordinals one.
Oh, yes. Was it this guy?
Yeah,
Cocktail Peanut.
Man, this is such a cool idea.
So this touches on that, but I don't think I've fully digested this. You want to?
I don't think I fully digested
it
yet, but here's my understanding. Okay, so this is changing gears a little bit. This is not necessarily Nostr, although maybe there'll be a tie-in, but it was just like, whoa. So we've talked a lot about AI being centralizing. One of the ways this guy wants to help decentralize AI is not through any kind of corporation, but just basically as soon as there's an interesting model, and maybe a model gets leaked or whatever, but if you want to have a model out in the world, instead of having it downloadable from a central repository where there's legal risk and blah, 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 his argument was share it as a torrent. But one way you can make sure it's always downloadable is to inscribe the files as an inscription on a Bitcoin ordinal, so an UTXO.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is, again, a really great example of a technology comes along, looks like a toy. People, stupid NFTs on Bitcoin. And then it's like, oh, wait a second. Maybe this is like a way to prevent AI from getting super centralized. And so the way I understood it is you basically would inscribe the torrent files onto a Bitcoin ordinal. And so they're there. And then you maybe have the magnet file for the torrent. I don't know where that is, like somewhere else in the web, but assuming you can get your hands on the magnet, well, maybe you could inscribe that as well. I don't know. But the idea is that now those torrent files live on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so that you always will be able to access and build this model.
Right.
And I mean, again, I haven't really thought through all the second order implications of all this, but the idea that any kind of data can now be published on the Bitcoin blockchain in a way that no one can ever take it down. This seems for both free speech and just making sure any kind of research or ideas are out there in the world, a very big deal.
Right. I like what he says here. He says, when an AI model is leaked to the world, the cat is already out of the bag. Doesn't matter what actions you take. People will train on top of those models and keep evolving. So another thing that I thought was interesting about this is step one is BitTorrent. So publish the AI model files to BitTorrent, and then step two is compose and upload a GOAT file, and which kind of touches on the ordinal stuff. And I think my understanding from reading this thread is he didn't actually do this because he didn't want to be the guy who launched it. He wanted to open it up to have who wants to be the Satoshi of this idea.
Who wants to take the legal risk?
I don't know if that was mostly what he was doing, was trying to just sort of find somebody who is willing to take the grenade there.
Well, and even if he's not, it shows the beauty. It's once the idea is in the wild, anyone can do it.
Yeah. You may ask, so can I use it now? Is it live? And the answer is no, it has not launched, and that's the whole point. I am not launching it, you are.
Clever. Thanks, Cocktail Peanut.
It's pretty funny. And then when I started sharing this around with some friends who follow a lot of the AI stuff, they showed me Petals. Have you seen Petals?
I haven't, no.
So Petals is another thing that I think it was just, announced a few days ago. I think I saw some news about it, but it's another approach to decentralizing kind of these AI models and, sort of the AI assembly of knowledge and information, which I'm I'm always excited about this stuff. I feel like we're really early to be, we don't even really know how we should do it in centralized way. And so I think we sort of need to figure that out. But meanwhile, I like the fact that there's a lot of exploration and like knowing that these could become problematic and like decentralizing them a bit. And I'm excited. I mean, there's a lot of capital cost to training these models.
Right.
You burn through your A100s. You're just like, chewing through cash trying to get these things to work. And like maybe the future is some sort of like a Bitcoin powered network where it's like, okay, you pay everybody a little bit to do their little bit of work in training the model. And I don't know exactly how proof of work in that system should work, because it's certainly not, the simplicity of hashing. To actually do that kind of computation is much tougher. So I think like hashing is probably fine for like actually generating the money, but then the actual like figuring out sampling, almost like the way mining pools work. I wonder if you could create a similar thing for like, AI training pools.
Well, I definitely think you're going to see like, and there's probably some lightweight protocol built on top of this, probably with Nostr as well, where all the things we talked about, distributed compute, storage, and bandwidth, like all of those things, there should be marketplaces for. I'm skeptical that like the long tail of like just some dude with like a CPU at home is ever going to contribute much anything. But I was talking actually, I met a guy at the airport on the way back from Costa Rica who was like kind of an older guy who's like a veteran from the sort of like IT world and like really experienced with data centers. It's great to have people like that and rabble around who've seen a lot of things to help some of the younger people. And his point was like, we need, we need competitors to GCP and AWS and Azure so that, they don't have to necessarily be quite as good or quite as cheap, but we need, data centers in enough different places. He was more skeptical in the super decentralized version. He was like, well, you just need like a company with enough corporate structures, with enough data centers, enough countries that it's like censorship resistant enough. And I was like, well, and maybe there's like a middle ground where it's not just everyone with their computer, but kind of like similar to this idea. Maybe you have entrepreneurs in Eastern Europe or wherever, and they happen to have access to the IT infrastructure and expertise and cheap and enough energy in a place to host servers or racks. So they are professionals, they are real companies, but they alone could never compete with, any of the big tech companies. But if there was a simple protocol, maybe you get 100 or 1,000 of these like, semi medium scale entrepreneurs around the world, and they can pool their resources to compete against the, the Microsofts or the Googles. So I think that's pretty interesting. And I think you could do that not just with, bandwidth, storage, and compute, but also potentially with some of this training stuff too.
And then you've got sort of the BitTorrent type protocol stuff that could help with, because ultimately these are exciting ideas for training AI, but even more foundational, simple thing is like, how do you do file storage?
Exactly.
Right.
File storage or any kind of shared computation. Exactly. And so, and I think what's interesting about this for the decentralized AI point is this idea by itself is cool, but it's certainly not going to solve the problem. Like to your point, okay, so the model's out there. Well, I have the model, like, do I have whatever $10 million or whatever it takes to train it and all the GPUs and blah, blah, blah? Probably not. But if the model's out there for live, and you've got, sort of more or less decentralized networks of data centers that can do something with the model, and potentially the ability to do funding via Nostr and Lightning, maybe you can start pooling resources to compete with some of the big companies to create the real open AI. By the way, it's just a small point on that. I don't track this nearly as closely as you do, but I saw tomorrow or Friday night Hugging Face, which I think has some AI models focused on decentralization. I don't know too much about them, but apparently they're doing a meetup in SF. There's like 1,500 signups, and the kind of theme was around decentralized AI. So I think there's real desire and fervor for that to exist.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, I hope so.
That's Friday, huh?
Yeah,
I think we may be out of town.
I'm out of town too. So otherwise, I would go. But
yeah, I would try to make that. All right. What else? I know we sort of haven't kept on any real.
Well, let's talk about, you put on that list. Well, here's Zapster. That's awesome.
Yeah, this kind of the prototype from Pablo of, I think it's right now it's just embedded a Spotify.
I love the logo.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
It's coming at you. Yeah, did you say there's another one of these?
Well, if you go back to that one you put up there, like I think Naval has his little podcasting network.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I had heard a little bit about this. That guy Colby, who was tweeting some stuff about like scaling on Nostr. Somehow it looks like he and Naval know each other, and I had heard Naval had at least an InPub and played with Nostr, but apparently he's got this network. What is it called?
Get air chat.
AirChat.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you told me it's like a little bit of like kind of like a social network for podcasts / discussion, whatever. Seems interesting. And they had more Nostr discussions than I realized. Now, first thing I'll note is they haven't had one in about 2 months. So maybe they play with it, don't see the opportunity. Maybe they do. I don't know. But he had a pretty interesting one on, I forget which one it was. It might have been even an earlier one. But one of his discussions around Nostr was basically asking the question of like, where is value going to accrue? And so I thought he actually had some pretty good takes on that, which is he was not at all bullish on the clients because he was like, if this thing gets any kind of velocity whatsoever, you know, the guys with, he was basically like, all that matters in that world is you want distribution and like lowest cost of distribution and widest reach of distribution. He's like, if this stuff starts taking off, Apple and Google basically can take their sweet time, maybe a Meta as well or something. And when they do, they can just like build the Nostr client that dominates everything. I actually have a slightly different take on that, but I'm curious if you heard that one or how you would react to his take there.
Yeah, I don't think I heard that one. I mean, I'm generally, I'd say, skeptical that there's as much. I think like in the space of social networking, we generally think about like a social network and how it gets all the users and dominates, and that's mostly because the client is the only access point to the data.
Exactly.
And Nostr's exactly breaking that open. And so it's not to say there can't be big clients. I think Damus is a very big client. It's very well built. And I think they're just like the pace of execution is just really far ahead of like maybe the second best in that world. And there's plenty of opportunity, but just like so far we've seen that. But I don't know that you can like capture tremendous outsized value at just the client layer because there's going to be so much competition and everything's open source and forkable, et cetera. So I'm like less convinced that there's like the Google or even Meta, Facebook, Twitter. I'm just like not really convinced they're going to come in and try to dominate by building the best client because like kind of for what reason? It doesn't really support their business. It really disrupts their model. Now, I think there's other reasons they could come in. Like maybe if you're Twitter and you see that like the thing as is not the right way and you kind of realize that there's a better way to do these things and Nostr has a lot of those features, maybe you come in and either make Twitter a client of Nostr or build a Nostr focused version of Twitter or some sort of adaptation layer. And then you realize that actually the business is in building a great relay or the business is in building thousands of relays that can all serve and monetize. But those are like vastly different businesses than serving ads or selling check marks or whatever their business is these days.
Well, so it's interesting. I think maybe sort of his point was if you thought about the first web as kind of the first big data lake or ocean, there's really like, we've talked about browsers, right? Like the browsers themselves were valuable. They were valuable because they get basically to the search service.
Yeah.
And there's basically two browsers that matter, like Chrome and Safari. And that's because of their distribution. And so I think his point was like, well, basically maybe, I don't know if he meant Chrome and Safari themselves or just Google and Apple because they own the phones and the operating systems, they will ship whatever. They'll either integrate it in the browser or if it's a totally new form factor, they'll just build that and bundle it in there and then direct people to the search services or whatever they end up building. Which I do kind of buy, and I think they will eventually at some point. They'll be forced to if this becomes the new internet. But I do think what's different this time around, what I hope happens is the range of experiences is like there's such a long tail that there's not like even Damus like is less than 1%, even if it's the big one,
right?
Because there's just like I mean, like every little community, like you're just using a different app or you're pulling in the different micro app for different things. Right. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so yes, Apple and Google as mobile operating system providers have a very strategic position.
For sure.
So 100% agree on that. And so if like, Google wanted to build the best Nostr client and just distribute it to everybody, they could certainly do that. And then that's a nice strategic position to like figure out how to build the best relay, maybe the best search engine across Nostr. Maybe it integrates with existing web search. So like there's a lot of things that they could do if they said, this is existential threat for the company. I don't think they're thinking that today.
Not today.
So it'd have to get like a lot further along. By the time it gets a lot further along though, like what else has the ecosystem figured out? Like how should a good relay operator work? How should inter-relay extra Nostr protocol stuff work? Like there's there's just a lot of those types of problems that you can't just come in with like a big fist and pound the table and be like, we're doing it my way. Cause it's kind of like, it's not, it's still to be evolved.
Well, so you know what I think would be really interesting is, yes, I generally agree with you. Although I do think their distribution points on mobile is so important that they probably can force a lot of things on people just from distribution.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
However, what I think would be really interesting is we either need to figure out some really novel breakthroughs that get so much adoption first that it kind of leaves them in the dust, do things that they can or won't do because it disrupts their business model. Maybe it just doesn't feed into search. Or what I'm increasingly thinking of more and more is like, I think somehow out of Nostr, the new app store has to come. Like someone has, I don't know if it's going to be a new phone that's open source hardware, Nostr focus. My real dream for this 10 years out is there's like a new Apple or someone that gives us open source hardware that's extremely,
I love it.
Like extremely widely adopted. There's an open source app store.
Yes.
I think if we really want this thing to flourish on a multi-decade timeline, we need that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that touches on the point that I wanted to go to with the kind of Google Apple thing, which is I think to answer that question, you can't reduce it to just like Apple is strong in this world, so they win in this new world, or Google is strong in this world. I think the most important question you have to answer is, what is the OS?
Yeah.
And I think we don't know what the OS is yet.
That's the big question.
This is exactly the thing that Google did to Microsoft. Microsoft said, we own the OS. Every app that launches, if you build Corel Word Perfect, we're going to build Microsoft Word and everybody's going to use it. So by owning the OS, they felt like this impenetrable moat. And then when the whole playing ground shifted to the internet, and the web browser is kind of like the web is the OS and the web browser is the access point to the OS. And whether you're running, whatever, Vista or Linux or Mac OS or whatever you want, doesn't really matter. As long as you have a web browser, you can access Google Docs. It kind of like shifted the playing field in a way that Microsoft, arguably could have built the best search engine, could have built the best web browser, could have owned the whole thing, but like the whole thing happened in a way that wasn't really, they couldn't just lay it up because the thing that they thought was important, which is like the OS that runs on the piece of hardware sitting on your desk, that no longer mattered. Mm-hmm. And I think we're kind of in a similar type of thing where like the difference between iOS and Android used to be stark, right? Now they're fairly like pretty similar phones. There's different features and stuff, but they're kind of like the world's kind of figured out roughly, better cameras, better, it's
yellow. That's the big like Apple billboard everywhere in there.
And so I'd say like my question is, what is the OS? And right now, I think we're talking about Google and Apple with some of the same mistakes that Microsoft made in the 90s.
Totally.
And so what is the OS? Like with the concept of like could DOMIS be an OS?
It's a great question.
I think it's credible to think that DOMIS could be an OS, and that maybe like the micro apps are the actual apps on DOMIS the OS. If that's the case and people build to like the DOMIS standard or the things that DOMIS chooses to do, like that's I think there's a pretty compelling kind of OS like argument to be made there. I'm not claiming that's what it should be. That's what Will wants. I'm not making any claims. I'm just saying I'm not convinced that the thing that runs directly on top of the hardware of your mobile phone is the right thing to think deeply about here.
Yeah.
And I think like, what is the OS is the question. And I don't know, is Nostr itself the OS? Is some like, maybe and people talk about super apps, but I actually don't find, the super app idea I feel is also somewhat similarly backward looking in a sense like.
Here's an idea for you.
Yeah.
I think, so we had that conversation with Christopher David. Obviously, he's thinking of the super app, but he also made the point, like, there's going to be all these different micro apps. And I think he made a very good observation, which is, look, grandma's not going to figure out how to deal with 500 micro apps. Just not going to. Like, she needs some way to pull them together and say what to do.
Yeah.
Maybe the OS, though, I wonder, it could be, it could be DOMIS, and somehow he allows you to plug in various apps. It could be the super app, but I agree those are kind of backwards looking. What if the next big wave is going to be a combination of AI voice chat plus this? And so all of the micro apps are API endpoints, and the OS is just the assistant you talk to. And you can choose Siri, you can choose whatever Google comes up with, or you have the open source version that's plugging into Nostr.
Yeah, so I guess like, is it instead of touch and visual, it's
voice,
audio and voice? Like, I think there's a compelling argument to be made for that being like
your personal assistant,
a common input-output mechanism, but I still think it's fairly low bandwidth compared to visual. So I feel like a voice assistant will always be useful and probably augments us in better ways, than we've seen yet, as LLMs, make their way into the world. But I don't know that I'm super convinced. I think like maybe it's glasses or something,
AR,
right?
yeah.
Like I'd find that kind of thing. I mean, I used to use. I don't know if you know that Steve Lee was the product lead on Google Glass.
What? I didn't. I knew he was on Maps, but
he did. Yeah. After that, so the kind of the very
hilarious.
earliest product that they ever launched was he was in charge of. And so we used to play with these things all the time. I must have like I don't know, half a dozen.
Do you still have some? Can we play them?
Oh yeah, I've got them around somewhere. I don't know if they still charge batteries, but this is like a really compelling form factor that is not at all dependent on the phone.
Yeah,
right.
I like that.
But it has a visual, so you can scan it very easily. It's like you can high density of information when it's visual like that. And so I think I think something in that kind of visual interactivity is still going to be at the core of our computing. I don't think we're going to, until we're at like Neuralink level where we're just like,
think about it. Yeah.
Thinking about it. I think voice and audio is useful, but maybe not the primary. And so I think the primary is still kind of either phone or AR, glass-like thing. But in there, I don't really know, like, I don't feel like the difference between Android and iOS are super meaningful compared to like what container contains all our micro apps.
Yeah.
And to me, whatever contains all the micro apps, or whatever helps us switch between, like, grandma's fine having iOS where she can open the Photos app when she wants to do photos, and she can open the Calendar app when she wants to do calendar, and she can open the the iMessage when she wants to message.
Do you think it's just as simple then as a new app store? Maybe it's graphene type thing. Like maybe it's open source hardware phone, an open app store where anyone can upload their micro apps.
I mean, stuff like that feels like it could. I mean, well, there's a lot of leaps you need to take to get to all of that. Like the open device thing.
Obviously, it's going to be like very expensive.
Yeah. And there've been attempts at stuff like this, and I think it's worth. I would not rule that direction out as impossible or not a productive path. It's not. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't say it's an obvious dead end. I think we're at a point now when like the OSs are commodity enough among each other, and could you find 100,000 or 1 million people who all care enough about feature X that you can get an open source that you can't get in these other ones? And then can you get all the the radio stuff to work well enough? And
well, I mean, one of my companies that's working on this is Umbrel, right? And so they've kind of got this thesis that, if you look at the computing paradigms, right, like it was, okay, you have, the personal computer from like the big mainframe.
Yeah.
And then obviously the mobile. And their argument is that the server can also be a personal server. It doesn't need to be like the big mainframe in the cloud. And so I'm not saying this is necessarily going to be the one, but that is kind of their paradigm, is that they have the open app store, and they're starting to plug more and more into Nostr as well. But maybe it's something like that. Like they're kind of directly attacking Apple and Google head on by saying, no, you should both have open apps for your clients, but also for your server.
Right. So who's going to build like the actual hardware that's going to enable this though? Would they ever get into that? Because they're mostly software, right? They tell you how to build your hardware, and they
were shipping hardware already, and then they had supply chain issues. But like,
okay,
stay tuned.
All right.
I mean, again, that's a very big boulder to roll, but like,
right.
I think we need people like that. I think they have pretty big ambitions.
Yeah. Well, because what I was going to say too is, there's a lot of, when we think about FIDO keys and hardware signing devices, and when these kinds of things become more natural or easier for people to think about as like important to use, kind of for normie tech type people, maybe these devices start to encapsulate some of those things, and it feels more like, oh, I'll just get the one that already has that instead of carry, all of these different things. I can kind of have like one thing that maybe it NFCs to it, or
totally. The other thing that's really interesting to me, we talked about them on our last Nostr News. One of those projects in the Bolt.Fun hackathon right now was the Japanese name Otsendai or whatever.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And I met another guy randomly.
It's like a 3D metaverse thing, right?
3D metaverse, but like various coordinates are mapped to Nostr nodes, right? And I met a guy who was not them, but who's also working on a very similar idea. So it seems like this is coming up in the zeitgeist. I just met him like one of the cafes in Vita. And that to me was really cool. Again, I've never been like a big metaverse guy. I kind of also think AR is a lot more interesting than metaverse, but who knows? I mean, some people are really into it. Maybe I wouldn't, I think the most shocking, coolest outcome would be like maybe the metaverse is the new internet and it's all based on Nostr. It's all mapped from Nostr coordinates. And who knows? Maybe that's what really takes off. And it's something like Minecraft first.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always thought that the internet is a pretty good metaverse. And
Exactly.
so Nostr is just like a new publishing format, like a totally new way to publish and use the internet. So,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of find that compelling. I think, the 3D nature is a little bit of a red herring in some sense. Like it's cool. You can do stuff with it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, step one.
The internet is the metaverse. Take that to the bank. Cool.
There it is.
What else we got on here?
What else? I'm going to just pop through. Let's
Yeah.
see. Oh, did you see this site, nostrbounties.com?
Yeah, I did.
So this is interesting. I think we've talked about bounties a lot. There's bountsr.com from NVK. There's this Stacker News bounties. This one, actually, I don't know. I guess it's made by Diego. Do you know who Diego is? I don't know that I've met Diego.
Which Diego is it? Well, yeah.
Anyway, but what I was going to say is interesting about it is it's I think one of the first examples. I think maybe Fiat Jav had pointed people towards it, but it's one of the first examples of kind of more participatory. Like I can go on here and add sats.
I love that.
And this touches on like the new, like, could you do a Wikipedia type idea?
Are the sats like you send those into a black hole no matter what, or is it somehow like you send them if some condition is met?
So my understanding is somebody makes this. So like this is posted by this person named Intuitive Guy, and
good name.
And then he says, I would like an implementation to the boost repost button. And he then has he's added some sats.
Cool.
And then I could come in here and add a note about why you're adding this reward. So I can, like we've talked about this before, like crowdfunding in a sense, right? Some of the geyser vision, but could you do it on Nostr, and could I show up and say, I will also add some little spec or thing that I'd like to do, and I'm going to add the sats to it. I don't know the details of how this is implemented.
Well, I mean, and G Sovereignty's thing is a little bit like that too. In that case, he doesn't actually have you send the sats, but he has you like sign a message to prove they're there. So I'm curious how they implement, but yeah, I like that.
And so this is like an example of like a more, like it's not, I think the idea is that it's more Wikipedia-like than say Instagram, right? Instagram, I'm the author, I'm the creator, I own the thing, the hub where we're looking at it. And I think the goal here, if I understood right, is a little more to make these pages the piece of content and then a bunch of people collaborate on the page. But I think the page has less of a concept of an owner, though I guess this one is posted by Intuitive Guy, so I'm not sure if that's entirely what's going on here. But I think I saw it in reference to that. And this was the article, How to Build a Decentralized Wikipedia, writing this on Abla after Fiat Jav shared a link to his article on Abla, which led me to Nostr Bounties.
And what's cool there is you're reading it on a read app, right?
This is read.nostr.com, yeah.
That's awesome. So it's like published on Abla, being read on a read-only app.
Yep.
It's a pretty cool meta thing.
So, okay, what else? We got Vitor Pamplona, so the creator of Amethyst, is doing, he published this thing, Weekend Project for Android devs. I thought it was kind of cool. He's just like, I'll give 1 million sats to 3 PRs, significantly increase the rendering and navigation performance of Amethyst.
I can't wait, by the way,
without cutting features.
Until in a couple of years or like 10 years from now, people are like looking at this like Bitcoin Pizza Day. It's like,
right.
I can't believe that guy gave $10 million for this little weekend project.
Really, he gave 2 houses on the coast of Santa Barbara.
Nice.
So I think that's cool. It's just like, it's not even super structured, but it just shows the energy for this kind of collaboration and people's desire and willingness to pay and probably get paid. And I don't know, I guess 1 million sats, probably for, depending on the amount of work required, this might actually be like a really great trade for somebody, if they're already playing around with this stuff. The Nostropical Hackathon winners. Did you follow this stuff?
Only a little bit. I mean, I didn't see. I was a little confused in this because the Bolt Fun Hackathon is still going, so I wasn't sure like how all this worked. I saw that there was some kind of torrent project that they said won, but I didn't get to go much deeper than that.
Yeah, so I think the one that won was sort of a decentralized file system, touching on some of the themes we talked about back in the AI stuff. So yeah, something, I don't know the specifics, but I think it was a torrent, file serving, kind of decentralized file serving thing.
One just small meta note there. This is sponsored by Nostr Social, which is Ravel's project.
Yep.
And it's cool because he had made the point when he was kicking all this off. He said, I think you heard some of the podcasts with G Sovereignty, but apparently, Odeo is a podcasting app.
Yeah,
and they got beaten by Apple, and they're like, "What do we do now? Let's just do a bunch of hackathons."
Right.
And that's where Twitter came out of. And so he was saying maybe the next Twitter will come out of this hackathon.
Right. Yep. And this was in Uvita, and it was organized by Hard Yaka, which is that venture firm that you introduced me to, right?
They're investors in his project.
I think. They're investors in Nostr Social.
That's whatever his original company was.
The planetary one or whatever. Okay. And then what is Universal Names? That was the other one that was one of the sponsors.
I pulled that up and I didn't get to.
Yeah,
I didn't fully didn't go deep enough to fully understand everything. But I'm assuming it's some kind of easy way for a universal name system.
Oh, okay, cool.
But I don't think it used the Bitcoin blockchain, so I didn't fully grok what they were doing.
Yeah, that's one. Actually, that touches on one. I might skip ahead if there's.
Yeah, go ahead and skip ahead. There's Nostr.torrent.
Nostr.torrent. Yeah, this is actually a GitHub page worth looking through, which I think, is this the one that won? I forget how I popped this one up.
It probably is, yeah.
The one I was going to look at was this. I thought was cool.
Yes.
So DID on Nostr. So DID, if I understand right, it's been, a decade of research, originally at Microsoft, maybe now at Square/Block. And it felt like the kind of thing that if the ideas are good ideas, they should kind of attach to a place where people are gathering instead of live kind of siloed. And I've kind of been poking around the internet trying to figure out my way. I think I told you about a Discord I joined and didn't really find my way. But then I saw this. I was like, oh, good. Like, looks like the DID work now is, at least making a little bit of there's more statement of what it is here. I can start to understand. So I understand now that they've got it's like a URI, URI that points to a identity document, and you can pull that identity document down. And
where are the identity documents stored?
I think they can be stored. I don't think there's
anywhere.
Probably anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're stored. It's a JSON object. I would love to learn about that.
It would be awesome, by the way, because I haven't gone through this yet, and I also have very limited understanding of DID. Mm-hmm. I also am encouraged that they're exploring, hey, how do we use this to solve some of the problems like Reeking and Nostr? Like, great. Right. I would love to get someone from Block or whoever's working on the DID just to answer these questions and also brainstorm how can we get these communities working together? Because my intuition, and I think Mike Brock, he posts on Nostr a lot about how this can help solve some of the Reeking issues. Mm-hmm. And I would love to better understand, is this the solution? Right. For me getting pwned on Nostr, so let's move forward.
Right. Also, if I understand right, I think the NIP5 stuff is nice, but maybe a little bit of a stopgap until we have.
Yeah, it's temporary. I'd imagine.
If DIDs can provide some sort of a more, I don't know if it's a goal of the project, but to have a universal namespace that's kind of tracked or sort of reserved on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Well, and again, I don't know how it does this, and that's why I didn't really get the universal namespace, the other project, that well. But to me, it just makes by far the most intuitive sense to use Bitcoin blockchain somehow. Yeah. And my understanding is DID uses Taproot signatures to kind of roll up a bunch of things in one transaction.
Yep.
But in the long run, if we're going to have a universal namespace, kind of like we're seeing now with the torrents and the inscribing, it just makes too much sense that the universal state machine, or I guess it's not really the state machine yet, but the universal record of the universal ledger is where we put that.
Yeah, totally agreed. So I'm excited that at least I saw there seems to be some movement toward thinking about this in a more, at least on GitHub now I can read about it, and I browsed, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert.
Me neither. I mean, I would love to learn more, and someone from Block, would want to come on and talk about that. That'd be great.
Yeah, love it. Okay, next up we've got Primal. I think actually before we talk about Primal, first this was just a Primal link shared where JB55. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it was just kind of similar to what you were showing earlier. Just I'm loving seeing the alternatives to corporations here.
Yeah.
It's just with the Amethyst guy. Mm-hmm. Here's JB55 saying, "Hey, I need better design. I'm just going to pay you sats."
Yep, super cool. So it's great. Great lightweight way to do that. Sorry, I got a little bit ahead of it because what I wanted to look at too on Primal is this.
Yeah, this is nice.
So we met, is it
Milligen?
Milligen? Yeah. We met Milligen at Nostr Rap, which was cool. We got to, kind of finally meet him. We've talked about his project before, but had never really interacted with him. So
Yeah, it's a great project, super fast.
And then one of the things I really like, and I've been an advocate of more of this kind of stuff, is like experimentation around things that kind of simplify the user experience, make it feel comfortable, even if they don't like Nostr itself is decentralized. So like we can have other things that aren't fully decentralized if they can help make the products and user experiences better. Like I'm a fan of lots and lots of that. Not one person's decision. Everybody trying all kinds of different things. And so this is a great example of that. So the explore page on primal.net is, I think, one of my favorite sort of, aggregation layers where you can see like 426,000 users, 11 million pub keys, 361,000 zaps, 82 BTC zapped, which probably includes some of the wash zapping. So like
Still.
piece, but yeah, that's still
I wonder how
number.
he's getting that 426,000 user count.
My guess is, I don't know the specifics, but my guess is either he's pulling it. I know Nostr Rap band in Artur's work is some of the stuff that a lot of people, Will had mentioned it on stage at Costa Rica, and
I think from my conversation with him, he's doing it independently because I know
okay.
he and Artur were exchanging notes, but I don't think he's using.
Okay, so maybe he has a similar to kind of the filtering and trust rank and kind of identity stuff.
Yeah.
That Artur's doing. Maybe Milchan is doing kind of a similar type of thing, but with a different, probably different algorithm, so maybe come up with a slightly different result. Yeah. But I mean, you see the total number of public notes, 33.8 million public notes.
Let's go.
7.7 million reposts, 11.5 million reactions.
I love watching it all tick up.
I know, right? And then you can actually see trending users. This is so useful. Like if you're a new user and you can just like pop in here and see, oh, here's some of the people I might want to follow.
Umbro, baby. Let's go.
There it is, yeah. And then I can launch off from there and see who they follow, and this just can go on forever, But it's not the only place to do it. It's just one of thousands of places where it could be done.
It just reduces friction for someone totally new just to get started.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe that increases the number of people that actually play with this thing by 50%.
Yeah. And get connected to meaningful content so they want to keep coming back because they're having a good experience. They're getting connected to the right stuff.
I think Miljan's doing a nice job with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And he kind of, it was fun because I think we met him and he said he's all done it in the last just few months, right?
Totally.
Of from scratch. He's,
as everyone has, right?
Yeah. But I think he has a history, he was telling us, as a kind of an enterprise software entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And sort of he's, now decided he's kind of going all in here. And I think he's already got a team of, maybe half dozen people. And they're just like shipping like, super polished products now. These feel like the kinds of products that, you'd expect to see in the web at this state of the world, right? It's not like, oh, npm apt-get install. You know what I mean? There's like
we've graduated from the command line.
Right. So
that's good.
Okay. So and we'll pop over here. This was the Stacker News thing. Oh, I liked how the Stacker News thread on Primal was talking about the best things about the client. So seeing trending, seeing zapped, seeing popular and latest. Follows for accounts you follows. The tribe is accounts you follow plus your followers.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are playing with that idea. It's also something that Nostr.social was playing with.
Yeah.
Did you see how they're? Because I talked to. Oh shoot! Sorry, we didn't have the video up for that part. We were just showing our faces. Oh. But some of the stuff that I think the Nostr.social stuff was doing. I got a brief demo at Costa Rica, and they were showing how they kind of only show the expansion of like people that you know and trust. And so it's a little bit of a more curated view based on like, it's more limited. It's not these like global feeds, open ocean. It's the people that you know and follow and trust and maybe mutuals or something. And then you can see other content sometimes if you have it in a certain mode, and then you can choose to view it if you want, but it's a much more like, I'd almost call it like friendly, more, you know what to expect instead of just, oh, I'm swimming in the ocean and whoa, I got bit by a shark.
You know what I can't help but think of when I see that Primal page and think about Nostr.social as well.
I'm going to bring it up now because I didn't have it showing before. So it's a beautiful site. So
it is a beautiful site and very well done. You can see the trending users, the stats and all that. But it reminds me a little bit like, and actually I think it's better designed, but like of Yahoo Stage. Like all of this kind of idea of like, you don't have access to like the whole wide, or you may be able to access the whole wide thing, but it's taking in, same with Nostr.social, very opinionated view. It's not perfect. It's not everything, but it's good enough to get you started. Kind of like in the Yahoo days of like, you're not going to search the whole web, but like, okay, I want to see sports and news and finance. And like that just kind of feels like that stage right here.
Agreed. It's nice that somebody curates it for us so that we can kind of get an easy starting point this way.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like using the open, fully decentralized stuff too. Like I get how that works, but when I introduce somebody new to it, I like to be able to show them, hey, there's friendly experiences here. We can, much easier to get around, just like closer to what you might expect.
Agreed.
And you can graduate to the, full self-sovereignty version over time.
Yeah, poco a poco.
Poco a poco. You were talking about this one.
Oh, I just thought this was really cool just to see different people having different experiences on there. Like, hey, if I'm coming from Germany, like maybe I only want to see German, or Brazil, I only want to see Portuguese. I think that's really nice to be able to easily filter for users from your country, and probably very useful, for countries where English is not.
Do people identify their languages, or the clients are going to do language identification as part of it?
I'm not sure. I would assume the client, but
yeah, cool. And then I think our last tab. Which one was this?
No idea.
Remember what we were?
I don't know what it was.
The dice.
But shout out to Nostr Rap Band because we forgot to mention the top. It was really cool to finally meet Artur.
Oh my god, that was so fun.
We didn't even get to talk about that. We had a great jam with him.
We had like
Kevin.
a 3-hour dinner, which it's just so. That's what's so great about it. We have nothing we have to do. It's like everybody's going out to party. We're like, hey, let's just have a little dinner and we'll do our thing. And
3.5 hours later,
and we talked with Kevin about his running career, and Artur about like what it's like in Turkey and Russia and migrating all over. It's like such crazy.
When we talked about highlights, that dinner with Kevin and Artur was also.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
By the way, shout out to Kevin as well. That guy, I didn't realize he was apparently a cross country track star. I was talking about like running in Alaska, seeing bears. Like, something I love about Nostr, Bitcoin too, but certainly Nostr is everyone's just interesting. Like no one's just like, oh, I have like a normal 9 to 5 life. It's like, no, I'm running with bears in Alaska. You're like,
right.
Fuck. Or in Artur's case, like, no, I've like traveled all over the world with my family and had to live in all these radically different worlds. Or Pablo's doing the world schooling.
Yeah.
Everyone here is extremely interesting.
Everybody's interesting.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And speaking of interesting, I noticed we have a dinner date tonight.
Yeah.
with
Bob,
a
fellow co-investor.
Another friend of ours. And we're going to be late for it.
So we should get going.
So I think we should get going.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good enough reason as any to call it the end of the pod for this week. So
Pura vida.
Pura
Hasta
vida.
pronto, guys.
See you
next time. Bye-bye.